Welcome to DepEd TV. Today is another day of fun-filled learning experience as we move along with your independent learning modules. I am your teacher in English, Teacher JP. Be with me today as we dig deeper into this new learning episode. In this lesson, there are 3 learning objectives you need to undertake. First, you are expected to identify similarities and differences between simile and metaphor. Second, illustrate how analogies and personification are used. And third, point out setting moods and sensory impression in a given text. In doing so, please find your most comfortable seats in front of your television. Turn your phones off or change it to silent mode to avoid distraction and be ready with your English 10, Module 9, your notebook and your pen. Be with me today as we will be learning together. Let's get started. In the previous episode, you learned that literary devices are all essential in bringing out creative and sound writing. Literary devices or figurative languages are significantly used in language. Examples of literary devices are simile, metaphor, personification, analogy, mood setting, and sensory impressions. We will be right back after this short musical break.
Magbayanihan na, magbayanihan na, bayanihan, pagtutulungan, walang kupas na kaugalian, natagatibay, sinasabuhay, galak sa puso ay walang kapantay. Panahon na naman ang brigada, pagbigkisin lakas at diwa. Tara na brigada na, brigada, eskwela, magkaisa sama-sama. Brigada, eskwela, salin na buong barkada. Brigada, eskwela, kilos na, magbayanihan na. Ikaw ako, tayong lahat, hawak kamay, sabay-sabay, kapit-bisig, buong bayan. Tara na, kumilos na. Tulong-tulong sa pagsulong, hatid na kalidad sa edukasyon. Sa kabataan, saya at dunong, buong madla sabay na aahon. Panahon na naman ng brigada, pagbigkisin lakas at diwa. Tara na brigada na, brigada, eskwela, magkaisa sama-sama. Brigada, eskwela, salin na buong barkada. Brigada, eskwela, kilos na, magbayanihan na. Brigada, eskwela, kilos na, magbayanihan na. Brigada, magbayanihan na. Magbayanihan na.
The first 2 common literary devices we have are simile and metaphor. Simile uses the words like or as to link 2 different items on the basis of certain shared qualities. Meanwhile, a metaphor compares two dissimilar items. However, it draws the comparison by identifying one item completely with another, imaginatively overstating the similarity and equating them. So now, let's give an example of a simile and a metaphor. Let's discuss them briefly. Here's an example found on your Module 9, page 7 and 8. Like a wave of brush fires, droves of army ants swept across hundreds of acres of grasslands. In this example, the army of ants which were swept across acres of grasslands was compared to the wave of brush fires. This qualifies to be a simile with the presence of the word like. Let's have an example of a metaphor. Droves of army ants swept across hundreds of acres of grasslands, a brush fire that could not be contained. Notice that the same topic was compared to the other except for the presence of the word like. We can say that the comparison was stated directly without the use of like or as. Now, let's discuss another type of literary device: analogy and personification. An analogy is an extended comparison which develops and explains the various points of similarity between the things compared. Writers often use analogies to relate an unfamiliar experience or set of circumstances to some other condition that will be more familiar to readers. Here is an example of an analogy. A free fall toward Earth is like descending rapidly in a glass elevator. If you lose sight of the structures holding the glass walls, and if you ignore the feel of the floor through your shoes, you will have some sensation of what it's like to float in space. The pull of gravity, your only reality. Notice that the first statement sounds like a simile. However, the following sentences give further explanation to the previous claim, turning this example into an analogy. Moving on, let's define personification. Personification is a representation of a thing or abstraction as a person or by human trait or form. They can easily sound pretentious and even ridiculous when you want to be serious. This is an example found in your module in page 17. The welcoming hands of sunlight touched my shoulders, and I looked up. Notice that the word sunlight sounded like it has the ability to welcome and touch, like as to which only humans are capable of doing. This inanimation of objects can be defined as personification. And lastly, setting moods and sensory impressions. Now, let's define setting moods and sensory impressions. In writing, it is important to identify what mood is essential for you to deliver an effective writing composition. The senses are also involved in making the text a lot easier to comprehend and fun as readers internalize ideas and impressions presented. Let's examine this example from your module. The night was coolly lit by crystalline full moon. As crunched through the pile of leaves, we cast silver shadows on the ground before us. I shivered as a small sharp wind nipped at my face. Notice that the terms coolly, crunched, shivered, and sharp corresponds to the human senses, which adds more vivid description of the person's experience about the night. Let's try this last example. Notice that in this example, the terms small, sharp wind were changed to words like waning or weak. Upon changing this, the passage gives a clearer impression of time and the inevitability of death. This is how generally moods and impressions work in a given literary piece. It gives creative and meaningful way of expression that is put into writing or even speaking.
We will be right back after these few reminders.
Para labanan ang banta ng COVID-19 sa ating bansa, mahalaga ang kooperasyon ng bawat isa. Ang pananatili sa loob ng bahay ay isa sa pinakasimple pero pinaka-epektibong paraan para hindi kumalat ang virus. Kunwari, ikaw ang tuldok na ito. Malusog ka at malakas. Lumabas ka ng bahay. Ang hindi mo alam, may nakasalamuha ka ng may COVID-19. Tandaan, mahirap malaman kung sino ang may virus, pero madali itong maipasa sa iba. Pwedeng naipasa na pala niya ang virus sa iyo nung umubo siya, o bumahing. O baka naman ay nahawa na dahil humawa kayo sa parehong bagay na kontaminado. Ngayon ay mayroon ka na ring COVID-19. Isa ka ng carrier na makakahawa sa iba. Dahil maaaring ilang araw pa bago lumitaw ang sintomas na ubo, sipon, hirap sa paghinga at lagnat. Pwede ring wala kang nararamdamang sintomas, ngunit nakakahawa ka pa rin. Pag-uwi mo sa bahay, maaari mong mahawahan ang iyong pamilya. Kasama na rito ang lolo at lola mo o ang mga magulang mo na may edad. Sila ang may pinakamahina na depensa laban sa virus. Ang mga may sakit sa puso, diabetes, high blood, at iba pang pre-existing conditions at mga buntis, mahina ang panlaban sa COVID-19. Kapag na-infect ang taong mahina ang immune system, posibleng magkaroon siya ng malalang karamdaman at kailanganing dalhin sa ospital. Sa patuloy na paglabas ng bahay at pagpunta sa pampublikong lugar, tinatayang maaari kang makahawa ng 3 pang tao at sila makakahawa ng mas marami pang iba. 20% ng mga nahawa ay maaaring maospital at dadami ng dadami ito habang mas kumakalat pa ang virus. Bukod sa dumaraming COVID-19 patients, marami pang ibang may sakit ang nasa mga pagamutan. Ang mga pasyenteng malubhang-malubha na ang karamdaman, hindi na maaasikaso. Wala ring lugar para sa mga pasyenteng may ibang karamdaman. Kaya nating iwasan ang patuloy na pagkalat ng COVID-19 kung iisipin natin ang kapakanan ng iba. Kailangan nating isipin at kumilos na parang bitbit na natin ang virus para hindi ito kumalat pa sa iba. Sundin ang social distancing. At hanggat maaari, manatili sa loob ng bahay. Kung talagang kinakailangang lumabas, panatilihin ang 1 metrong layo sa ibang tao. Maging malinis din sa katawan at sa kapaligiran. Parating maghugas ng kamay gamit ang sabon at tubig. At i-disinfect ang mga bagay na madalas hinahawakan. Ang mahalaga, mapabagal natin ang pagkalat ng COVID-19. Para mas kakaunti ang mga kailangan magpa-ospital at mabawasan ang mga Pilipinong magkakasakit. Magiging epektibo lamang ito kung mananatili tayo sa bahay. Sundin ang social distancing. Isang maliit na sakripisyo para sa buhay ng kapwa nating Pilipino. Tulong-tulong tayo. Let's beat COVID-19.
It's time for you to work with the different tasks in your self-learning modules. In page 9 of your module, identify if the statements found is either a simile or a metaphor, and write your answer in your notebook. Now that you were able to successfully identify whether a statement is a simile or metaphor, it's time for you to continue working on pages 20 to 21 of your module. What can I do? Activity 2.1, Creative Analogies, and Activity 2.2, Using Personification. Activity 2.1. Choose 3 of the following pairs of items or think of a pair of your own. Compare the 2 items and develop the comparison into an analogy. For Activity 2.2, write 5 sentences, each containing personification, using an item from the following list in each sentence. Good job, learners! Now, let's test your writing skills. Please work on page 29 of your module. What I can do, Activity 2, writing with sensory impressions and symbols. Use one of the following subjects or think of one of your own. Write a passage of 150 to 200 words. Include sensory impressions, symbols, wherever possible in your passage, but please be guided with a rubric found in your module. How's your writing, grade 10 learners? Excellent! You may continue after watching this learning episode. Before we end, please don't forget these few reminders. Finish all the tasks in your module. Do not write anything on the module. Write all your answers on your notebook. And lastly, please handle and use these modules with care. On your next episode, you will know the different types of discourse markers. Did you have fun learning English? Good to hear that! Once again, this is Teacher JP saying, do not settle for anything less, always aim for the best. God bless!